Great. So, yeah, I've the pleasure of interviewing Isabelle, Akshaydeep, and Dayanita, and I'm going to be interviewing them on this theme that we're exploring of internationality, or more specifically, internationality conditions for Sangha. So exploring that theme, and we started it last week. Dayanita, nope. Dayanita, that was there last week, just exploring, starting to sort of map out some territory as to what is Sangha really, and doing that by talking about these three levels or stages or modes of consciousness, of ordinary consciousness, and then the consciousness of the true individual, traditionally called the stream entrant, and the consciousness of a Buddha. So, and it's the second level of consciousness that is the essence of Sangha. That's what Sangha really is. So, and the first two levels of consciousness can be distinguished by how they identify, how they hold identity. So the first level of consciousness, ordinary consciousness, holds identity, who I am, in a fixed and sort of rigid kind of way. And then the second level of consciousness, consciousness of a stream entry, of a true individual, still has an identity of sorts. You're still, if you become a true individual and you're born English, you're still sort of, you know, you might still have discernible traits of Englishness, for example, but you hold that identity differently. You hold it much more lightly, much more provisionally, because the true individual fully embraces change, the fact that you can grow. So that's how you can distinguish these two levels of consciousness, and the second one being essentially what sort of Sangha is. Sangha, this transformation of consciousness, and how what sort of interaction can emerge from that. So just that's what Dayanita, sort of just mapped out for us, mapped out the sort of territory for us. But in a way, a sort of simpler way of talking about Sangha is this sort of deeper communication that can arise between us when we're not so narrowly sort of tightly sort of holding on to our own identity. We can come into relationship more fully with other people more authentically. The true individual, in letting go, not holding identity so tightly, can do that because the true individual sort of experiences, acknowledges within consciousness that is something that is beyond conditioning, beyond their conditioning. The possibility of enlightenment is sort of latent within consciousness. Yeah, so that's that allows a kind of just opening up to that vision of consciousness, allows sort of deeper, can allow deeper possibilities of communication between us. So yeah, that was last week, just sort of setting the context. And this week, I want to interview these fine people because they live in a different culture from the one they were born into, which can be challenging, can't it? I've done a tiny bit of that, and it can be challenging to do that. But it's a very, very interesting theme that Sangha has kind of drawn out in his teaching, this aspect of internationality as an intrinsic part of practice, or a possible area of practice. He's not the only one to have sort of drawn attention to this. The writer and philosopher Camus, Albert Camus, the Algerian, he said it's when you go abroad that you feel both in the same moment estranged from yourself and closer to yourself, which is a bit unusual, isn't it? But I guess what he's talking about is these two levels of consciousness, that our self that we hold on to very tightly gets questioned, gets sort of threatened in a way by going into a different culture. At the same time, we're somehow pushed into something that's more essentially us. So you're both estranged from yourself in a foreign culture and somehow sort of brought closer to yourself in the same moment. It seems like that's what Camus is sort of pointing to. So very, very challenging, but quite a valuable sort of spiritual practice. But that's not specifically what I want to ask interview about. I want to interview today about, is actually the conditions of internationality better for creating Sangha? That's what I want to, that's the question I want to ask of you. Yeah, is the conditions of internationality, rather than just being in our own culture, is it actually sort of more propitious? Is it better for creating this deeper communication, more authentic communication of Sangha? So that's our task today. Yeah, so lastly, I will just say, I think it's very, very relevant question. It's a very, very relevant way, aspect of Sangha for us to be looking at in such an international, well, increasingly sort of international world. Certainly Cambridge is quite international, isn't it? How many different national, put your hand up if you're not from England. You weren't born in England. Yeah, so that's pretty good. It'd be great if it even more, wouldn't it? But that's pretty international. So how can we step towards this? What are the opportunities of it, the spiritual opportunities of it? Let's sort of embrace this aspect of our community here in its full sort of possibilities, challenges as well as possibilities, but in its full possibilities. So that's why I think it's a very interesting area to be exploring. So what I wanted to do, that's enough by way of preamble, give you guys a chance to say something. Yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to start by asking, in a way, you to introduce yourselves. So just say your name, say when you came from, when you left your homeland, and how long you've been here, and then maybe just say what it's like for you to go back to that. Just a word about what it's like to go back as compared with living here. What's that sort of like? Just for us to get a bit of an introduction to you. Would anyone like to start?
Yeah, I can start.
Yeah.
So I'm Isabelle. I am French. I left France a long time ago. It's going to be nearly, yeah, if I say that, it shows how old I am. So like, probably around, yeah, more 30 years ago. And I left France to live in Central America for 6 years. And after I moved to UK, I've been living here for 20 years. So I'm reaching the point when I will be living abroad more time than I've been living in my own country, which is also a bit like, wow. And yeah, so there's been a lot of challenges, but also a lot of learning and growth living in different cultures. Well, how is it when I go back to France? I just can see that I'm not that French anymore. So I am and I am not. So someone in between. I don't know where in between exactly, but it's not, so it's familiar, but it's not so much. And I can see I have absorbed different things from different cultures. So I interact also differently in different situations. So that, it's been, initially it was a bit disconcerting, but now kind of I've come to accept it is part of the process.
Right. Akshaydeep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I left India. I'm from India, sorry, by the way. 2004, that's 20 years, similar time. We actually worked together. So I have strong memory with Isabelle, saying Isabelle at Windows. Anyway, going back to, 20 years, I came to England, 2004. And what else I need to add? I know I need to tell how it's like going back, but
Yeah.
how is like coming?
No, what's it like for you now going back to your, and how does that
uh,
compare with your experience here?
Going back is great. Well, when I went first time after 2 years, I hated India. First time, I literally wanted to run away from my own culture. But then when I went after 3 years, I was crying. I went to India back and I was crying. Oh gosh, what I was doing last time, so there was change, and I love it now going back. But then half of me doesn't feel Indian anymore, because almost half life I lived here. So, and I can't tell people when I go back to India that I'm not used to the regular culture. So it's like they can't see I came from I live different culture, because they can't see the color. If they see I'm Indian, so it's the advantage as well. I can just relax, don't need to. Yeah, so it's I enjoy it and I struggle as well. So it's a mix of both. Yeah.
Right. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm Dayanita. I was born in Germany. I grew up in Germany. I came to the UK 35 years ago to study, to go to university. I sort of didn't intend to stay at the time. It just sort of happened. But I've lived my entire sort of adult life in England. Sometimes I feel a bit of a fraud, because sometimes I feel like I've become more English than English people. I've noticed that in myself, like certain mannerisms that I used to find really difficult, and now sometimes I've noticed myself doing them or saying things. And anyway, so that happens when I go back. It's at the same time familiar and it's different. I feel almost like a bit like a tourist in my own country. But I've noticed lately, particularly with Sangha, I feel a real urge or a yearning to make connections with the Sangha in Germany. So I've sort of made some efforts to do that, just to see, just because I feel sort of almost like a wish to reconnect with my own country and my own culture.
Interesting. Great. Thanks very much. Really interesting point. So what I'd like to ask you about is friendships, significant connections that you've made with people of different cultures. And I wondered if you'd each just share some of your experience of that. Initially, just this question of kind of what are the differences actually? What are the differences that you notice in those friendships, the kind of cultural differences? Yeah.
Don't have any volunteer yet.
Same way.
Who's going first? Yeah, the differences in friendship.
Yeah. In a particular friendship, what differences do you actually notice?
I quite enjoyed my friendship in different culture. Actually, I give an example of Arthpriya.
Mm.
I used to work with Arthpriya for good years, and many other friends, including Arthasiddhi, Sadaraj is here. But it's I quite enjoyed. I find the depth in friendship in different culture, which I did have friends in India. It's not like I was not enjoying that, but it certainly brought different. It kind of broadened my what's the word trying to get. The definition of friendship has definitely got different meaning in my life, and I said, oh yeah, I can be friend with the person from different culture, and I can understand him better. And yeah, so we actually got. I didn't struggle to make friend in England, not with all English. The people I work, they become my friend, but some which are still like after 20 years, I call them friends, and I think got a lot of benefits as well, and we learn from each other. Yeah, so there was common ground. Sangha was definitely a common ground. The Dharma, it's not like just any friendship, just going into pub and get drunk, and then it wasn't that kind of friendship. I was talking about more like we were discussing Buddhism and practice and get something out of it more meaningful, and got benefited from it.
So were the things that were different to, say, with Arthpriya, were there things that were different with Arthpriya in terms of his attitudes as compared with friendships and connections in India?
Yeah, well, interestingly, he's much older than me, almost my dad age, but it was never felt like that. He was like in India, when someone is of my dad age, I had to give him respect. Can't be just friend. But with Arthpriya, I was more like a friend. We used to go for walk, and the topic I was to discuss with him, I would have never discussed in India with that age people. So there was more openness. Maybe it's part of culture as well, because he's from Western culture. He was more open to the topics which maybe there's a taboo in India. You can't just discuss. So that helped me in my friendship. Open up. I've got to learn a lot of things. Yeah, about life. And he was already a good practitioner, and so he was bringing. I'll say, I got benefited from his practice and his approach towards non-English people. The way he was, I never felt the barrier that he's white and he got English background, and that was, I never felt that barrier between our friendship. Yeah, it's very spontaneous.
Well, maybe I'd be good to ask you a bit more about that, but let's just stay with this area of kind of the differences. So there were certain things that you could explore more easily actually with the foreign culture than What I wonder about either Isabelle or Dayanita, differences. What different, thinking of a particular friendship across a culture. What are the differences that you experience? Because actually, in a friendship, you can sort of forget about it almost, can't you? You end up just being friends. You don't sort of notice the differences. But what are the differences?
It's kind of reflecting on that, because there's my friendships in France, the ones I have in Latin America and the ones here. So it's kind of, it covers different cultures. And in a way, when we're talking about identity, I can be slightly different depending on the culture, because it's a different way of like people are relating in a different way. So I feel like Latin America is very more like community, so having friends, but all together. Is much more physical, tactile, and kind of in a way it's more like it's a mix. You don't really speak something at very deep level, but at the same time the friendships are very important. So it's more like spending time together, sharing things together. So I feel like Latin America is one like for me, one extreme, and England is the other one where it's much more one-to-one rather than being with a group. But also going deeper into the conversation with people. And France, I would say, is like in between. And it's been interesting for me to see, like, you just kind of adapt to. And the adaptation is not so much about me losing my identity. It's more like helping the connection with people at different levels, because it functions differently, because we are coming from different backgrounds and conditions. So that's kind of.
So the difference is actually helping connection.
At least for me, it has been very, very rich in having to understand what was really important in order to connect with people coming from different cultures and having different ways of communicating and being together. So I've kind of had to lose my French identity somehow, but it's like in the sense of not losing but being loose around it. And which has been at times was challenging, because there was also sometimes really resisting about it, but also it really helped me to open my mind and having to kind of again find ways of how do I have a true connection with people from different cultures. And feel and seeing that that's there's a lot of letting go, but and being really receptive and it makes sense.
It does. That's very interesting. It is. I wonder, Dayanita.
I'm just trying to think of friendships. I mean, in
you not got any friends?
No. But what makes me really acutely aware, I don't think I have very many or many deep friendships with people who come from a very different culture.
Okay.
I was thinking of, I've got friendships, with people from England, the UK. Arya Jaya is my private preceptor. She's from Australia, but Australian. I mean, it's different, but it's sort of
it could be
subtle.
more radically different.
Yeah, but I mean, but I remember what I found when I first moved here. I found it really difficult to make friends because of the assumptions I had. I thought I'm moving from Germany to England, which is practically next door. I've been here before. I thought, it's Western Europe, what can possibly go wrong? And those subtle differences I found really, really hard. I found it really difficult to work out what people meant, what they were saying. Sometimes I thought it probably would have been easier if I'd moved to India, where I just assumed everything to be different, and you sort of adapt differently to it. And so I'm trying to think what you were saying, sort of in terms of communication. But that's one thing that struck me.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, can you remember what was that things like directness and indirectness, for example?
Yeah, very much so, and never quite knowing where I was with somebody. Particularly women. Men are just more, generally more direct. But and
so that's really quite challenging, not being able to read the signs in a way.
And but then I don't know how that affected my friendships. I mean, if in the end I sort of adapted, I think, it wasn't that I necessarily gravitated to other German people because of other Germans on campus, in Europe. I mean, I did have one German friend, but we didn't get on. I don't know, you make friends because somebody comes from the same place and you realise you actually got nothing in common. So there's nationality doesn't mean that you necessarily get on with somebody. Even some, Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Let's keep an eye on time.
Yeah, sense of humor is also, I don't know if it was also, yeah, like very different sense of humor depending on different cultures, and that's also yeah, sometimes difficult because you like like I would like sometimes to be, you know, more like express more my sense of humor, but yeah, people are not going to get it. So I feel like
Yeah.
even now.
Yeah, so it is challenging. It can be really quite challenging, can't it? And it can push you back on. Well, I was quite struck, Isabelle, by what you were saying. You were talking about how, in a way, everything's thrown up in the air, and you can't rely on the usual modes that you function, and that can be very, very challenging. But it can also sort of be creative. You're pushed back into, okay, what is the basis of, you know, connection then? How do we do this? Whereas usually we just do it kind of without thinking about it, don't we? We sort of follow that largely. We do it somewhat unconsciously. And I guess this is where, you know, it'd be interesting to ask this question. When you do in a connection with someone of a different culture, where actually you've got kind of hardly anything in common by way of, you know, common sense of humor, films you watch, you know, music you like, background. You know, sometimes we were talking about, sometimes your friends can't read your background. They don't really know where you're from, you know, in a different culture. I think that can be an advantage, but it can mean that you're a bit sort of, well, it's challenging. You're not sort of seen. So when there aren't any of those things to rely on to connect us, what is it that was the basis of the connections that you made?
Yeah, it's interesting. We were discussing about that few days back.
Yeah.
But the other is really good friend of mine, and he's practice as well. So, yeah. No, the basis, I think, for me, the friendship I built up in UK is definitely Sangha. Yeah, the context was Sangha. So sometimes we did not have discuss. We don't know. We didn't bring the topic like music because we didn't have common music to share, or which singer you like. I had no idea what Arthur Priya, like, for example, in his 70s. So which English singer he was. But the basis we had was the practice and how to go deeper in practice. Or what does Buddhism mean for him and for me? And surprisingly, I found is the practice was pretty much same. The suffering was pretty much same. Doesn't matter which context, which culture we came from, and the problem was pretty much same. Just the words were different, but the background was, yeah. So the basis was connecting the reality of life and understanding the meaning of life through Buddhism.
Yeah,
at least in that context. I did make friends outside of non-Buddhist as well, but it was hard to discuss beyond like football or salsa as it goes to that, or the career. Beyond that, it was hard to bring any discussion with them. If I used to talk to vegetarianism, they said, "Oh, you vegetarian? What do you eat?" Like, hundreds of vegetables. Like it's like they don't understand something. So with the Buddhist friend, it was a benefit having like Western Buddhist friend or the Buddhist from not my culture. We were actually going deeper. Yeah, sometime in India, I was struggling to get into discussion at that level, but here I think I've gone deeper with my practice and friendship.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting, isn't it? It reminds me of something that the first order member who moved over, first disciple of Bhante Sangharakshita moved over to India, Lokamitra. He said his vision of Sangha is that you try and get people together who have absolutely nothing in common, so that the only basis that they can relate on is the Dharma, is Sangha. They've got nothing else in common, which is, you know, it's very, very kind of typical of Lokamitra, very, very sort of challenging vision of Sangha. But it's quite interesting, isn't it? It sounds like there's something of that for you.
Yeah.
Actually, you couldn't rely on all the known, familiar sort of cultural things you had in common in India. What you had in common was the Dharma.
The Dharma. Yeah, definitely. That helped me a lot. Yeah.
Interesting. Great. Well, what about I think you've got more from perhaps even from sort of specific connections. What is it that that transcends kind of cultural difference in that relationship? What's the basis?
I mean, I could only think of one example that came to my mind. What you said, you know, how do you connect if you haven't got the same language and the same culture at all, or if you, which it's not a Sangha or Dharma example at all. But I remember being in Jordan and working in Jordan, and we had some Jordanian workmen. And we just connected through humor, even if you can't talk to each other. I don't know, it's because it so struck me at the time. I was thinking, I don't know these people, you know, at the end of the day, they disappear behind a rock, you know, like, and I don't know their, you know, their culture, their language at all. But there was this one specific incident where something happened, and everybody just laughed about the same thing. You know, I don't know. I find that really connecting in sort of across cultures with other people. But in terms of Sangha, I think I would have the absolute confidence, I think, if I moved to another country where there was a Sangha, that there would be a point of connection now, you know, for that reason, for the sort of connection, that Dharmic connection, even if I'd never been to that country before, like Mexico, for example, you know.
Yeah. And what's that based on? What's that confidence based on? An experience, you had that experience.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I suppose when I say that connection, like with humor, is like when you laugh with somebody, you sort of see the common humanity you have. You see that sort of common, almost like a softness. And with the Dharma, I would have the trust that if I meet another Buddhist in another country, that we have, you know, I suppose similar ethics, similar values, but a sort of common ground of understanding of how we approach things, of what's important for us.
It's fascinating, that, isn't it? That lovely little experience you share there of where humor breaks out, and as you say, you just see the humanity, you see the common humanity. That can be so easily hidden, can't it? But it can also be revealed in moments like that, even though you can't. Yeah, it's great. Isabelle.
In fact, I had also kind of a similar example of there is more common humanity. So I went to Morocco in my 20s and with a friend of mine, and so visiting his family, and he has a cousin, and she was still quite young and making rugs. She couldn't speak French, couldn't speak Arabic. But somehow, so she took me to and showed me what she was doing. Somehow we just connected. There was something there that was really a profound experience for me. And when I left, we both burst into tears, because we were already like feeling really attached to each other, and just having this kind of deep connection somehow happening like magically with someone from a different culture you can't communicate verbally with, but there's something there that's kind of still communicating. It was really kind of yeah, I think it's why, yeah, for me, it's kind of initiated for me to live abroad in a way.
Really.
So yeah, I'd relate to this, and I feel for me with the Sangha, what we have in addition to that is like, you know, these kind of connections, they happen, it's like in the moment, but with the Sangha, there's an intention. We are there with the intention to connect, to communicate, to share, even if we come from different backgrounds, cultures, and so on. And that makes even more powerful in that process in terms of communication, in terms of the depth where you go, friendships you can create.
Yeah, really interesting.
Just want to appreciate, can I add something?
Please do.
Yeah. The experience I had with Isabelle, like when I came first time to UK, and you were new as well at Windows, but it's been 20 years for our friendship now. Yeah.
Yes.
But she's always same, very kind, friendly. The memory I had with Windows, the person who is very friendly and kind to others, always smiling, helpful. I want to appreciate that about you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's been great. Yeah.
Lovely. Well, that's maybe a lovely note to end on, unless there's anything else, any last things that haven't been said that you've been kind of wanting to say.
I think it's for me, is why I keep, I think it's very important to have an international Sangha. I really, really value that. Because I think it's so rich, and for everyone. So yeah, definitely. So I really enjoy having that.
Yeah.
It's more than just enjoying. It's really important.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah.
If I get an option to choose between a group of just Indian and me and international, I'll select international group, mix of all cultures. That will be my priority.
Yeah.
I enjoy that most.
Yeah.
The mixed international culture. I think I can learn a lot from different culture. Yeah.
You're nodding as well, Dayanita.
I totally agree. Yeah, I think it brings so much to our Sangha, the internationality. You know, I think and we can do so much more. I think to bring in more diversity and stuff. So I think that's really important.
How would you sort of characterize what it brings in?
Just different experiences, different views. You know, challenges. Stuff that comes in, challenges, and how am I? You know, what do I take for granted? What's my practice? A lot of those things.
Sounds all very challenging. But that's great. Well, thanks very much, all of you, for just sharing something. It's quite touching, actually. It's obviously important to all of you. It goes deep in your lives, and I just want to thank you all very much for coming and being able to talk about it. And what we'll do after that, we'll have a tea break now, but we'll go into groups, in which I'll throw out some questions for the groups. Group leaders, don't worry, I'll pass around slips, but the questions are sort of similar. So think of someone of a different culture who you feel a genuine connection with, and then just see if you can identify, how do you differ? What is the difference? And then, does this difference allow you to be different from how you normally are in some way? Is it an opportunity in some way, that difference? And then, what is the connection between you based on? What is the basis of the connection? So those three questions we'll explore a bit more in the groups. But for now, we'll go for a tea break. But lastly, thank you very much to Dayanita, Akshaydeep, and Isabelle.